We all agree on Hamas, on a two-state
No, we don't agree with
solution.
Hamas. No, we're against
Yes,
Hamas,
we're all against
absolutely.
Hamas.
What happens when you have a man that wants to be prime minister but does not have a good command of the French language, and he enters a leadership debate? Well, you end up with that person, named Mark Carney, effectively telling everyone that he agrees with a terrorist organization.
Oops. Let's take a look.
Yes, but our position must be a two-state solution, and we need to work towards peace. And with regards to a future government of a Palestinian state, we must ensure that Hamas does not play a role in that. It's the only way that we will ensure lasting peace. This is what we want.
Just rapidly. So when I say that we should recognize a Palestinian state, it has nothing to do with Hamas. It has to do with the population. We want to help them rebuild. So I'm not proposing for one moment that we'll work with Hamas.
We all agree on Hamas, on a two-state
No, we don't agree with
solution.
Hamas. No, we're against
Yes,
Hamas,
we're all against
absolutely.
Hamas. We are.
That was not a translation error, as you can see, because Freeland and her translator said, no, we're against Hamas.
Right. So
So Carney really did say that we agree with Hamas, essentially, is what it translated to.
yeah, I think he was saying, I think it was something along the line of nous d'accord avec Hamas, which essentially translates to, we agree with Hamas. And that's where Freeland jumped in and was like, no, we don't. We do not agree with Hamas. So.
Now, I think we can all understand this was probably a translation error on Carney's part that, again, I think he's like me where he takes what he wants to say in English and translates it into French as he goes, making mistakes along the way. However, if you want to be the prime minister of the country, these kinds of mistakes are not acceptable.
They can't happen.
Right.
Because you're essentially saying, because if there's nobody there to correct you, right? If you're standing at a podium and there's nobody there to correct you, you're essentially telling everybody, I agree with a terrorist organization. That's what you're saying.
In a bilingual country, you need to speak both languages flawlessly. So things like this do not happen.
Right. Like then you have Jack Mead who can't even speak the English language, properly because he calls, potatoes apples.
But I would argue that was a translation error from French to English.
Could be.
Do people make mistakes? Yes, absolutely. But when you're at the level of prime minister or you're wanting to be prime minister, mistakes that like Carney just made are very, very costly. Now the Conservatives are going to grab a hold of this and they're going to say, look, he agrees with Hamas.
Or they're going to say, look, this guy can't speak French properly. And here's an example of how egregious those mistakes can actually be. It positions Canada as in a nation that aligns itself with a terrorist organization. Like that's how quickly a mistranslation, because he's thinking in English and then speaking in French, that's how that can happen. So, the rest of the Liberals actually had to correct him because they didn't want to be associated with that. Because he's saying, we agree with Hamas. No, we don't. No, we don't. Please correct that. And then he says, of course we don't. But this is the problem.
Well, and again, yes, it was a translation error, but to everybody watching, it looks really, really bad, especially when you're at the level of prime minister or you're trying to be prime minister.
Right. So it was a very, very, very big mistake. And you have some people criticizing the Conservatives for actually calling this out. And they're like, oh, really? You're just going to do this? That makes you look bad. No. The Conservatives are criticizing their political opponent for something he said in a debate.
Right. What's that saying? All is fair in love and war. And this really is war. I mean, the Conservatives are trying to win the government from the Liberal Party, who has held it for the past 10 years. They're going to use any and everything that they can against their opponents, the Liberals.
Well, because if they don't, then they're not doing their job.
Right.
Like, I would expect the exact same thing to happen with even more vitriol if the situation was reversed. If Pierre Poilievre made a gaffe like that, give me a break. They would say, see. So, yeah, this is interesting. Now, most of this debate, which is why this video is not going to be 4 hours long, was pretty ridiculous. It usually debates
Are more lively?
Well, they're more lively, and people are disagreeing with each other.
Yeah, this was just kind of like an ego stroke, pat on the back. I agree. Like, it reminded me of that episode of Futurama where they have the two political candidates, and the first one says, that's unthinkable. And the second one goes, I wouldn't think of it. Like, it's just, they're clones of each other. That's really what I feel with all these candidates.
Yeah. Thank you, Mark, for bringing that up. Oh, I'd really like to thank Frank for talking about this. And I'm just sitting here watching this, thinking in my head, don't any of you want to win?
Well, they do want to win, and they want to win against Pierre Poilievre, whom they spent the entire time bashing. This is like an extended part of the election that hasn't even been called yet, and all these Liberal candidates are using it to bash Pierre and the Conservatives. Well, I don't think they said anything against Jagmeet Singh or the NDP.
Oh, I didn't hear anything
or
that
the
actually
Bloc.
came up.
No.
I heard Trump and I heard Pierre.
Right.
And that was it. Like, just about every single question that they couldn't, that didn't start with the word Trump, which many of them did, they related back to Trump, or they related back to Pierre Poilievre. So this is why I think if Trump's plan is to literally pull this tariff threat away from them right before the election, that would be a masterstroke by Donald Trump, because this entire debate, this entire campaign, they have made all about Donald Trump. Why? Because they don't want to talk to you about all of the crap that the Liberal Party has actually put Canada through over the last 10 years. They only want to talk about Trump and say, see. And this is what Pierre has been saying. It's literally distracting people in order to divide them.
Well, and the interesting part is going to be, so this was last night's debate, the French debate on Monday night, and it's going to be interesting to see if the English debate tonight is the exact same way, where it's anti-Trump, anti-Poilievre. And the reason I say that is because in Quebec, the Conservatives are the fourth party typically, so they're already down in the polls. It's going to be interesting to see what they have to say to English Canada, where the Conservatives are winning. I mean, the Conservatives are, last time I checked, still ahead in every province except for Quebec. So it's going to be really interesting to see what the English results say.
Anyway, here's another highlight of another question, and this question was actually one of the few that Mark Carney looked over with surprise when Chrystia Freeland kind of jumped on him about artificial intelligence in healthcare.
Well, first of all, we have to maintain provinces for the provinces, and we have to respect their jurisdiction, including Quebec's jurisdiction, of course. Secondly, we have to eliminate obstacles to nurses and physicians here in Canada. We should only have one Canadian economy, not 13 different ones. Thirdly, we have to build a healthcare system which is modern. We have to use, as Mr. Bayliss mentioned, one single digital medical file across the country. It has to be a national file, and we have to increase the use of AI within the healthcare system. And as the federal government, we can work in cooperation with the provinces.
500 billion in the United States on artificial intelligence, and a lot in France as well, not part of the debate, but there it is.
We have to invest. We have to increase our spending on AI.
Mr. Jobin, AI can't do everything.
We have to add physicians as
I
well.
agree. And Canada is very strong in AI. We have to leverage that. We have the capacity.
So this is one of the huge problems with politicians and artificial intelligence.
They don't understand what it is or how it's supposed to be used.
Correct. And they don't seem to understand that AI is not at the level where you can just go pop, put it into the healthcare system and say, all right, do your thing. Well, what exactly are you expecting it to do? Because you can't trust AI to diagnose things right now.
Well, that's what they're thinking it would do.
Like, and they can't. What AI can do is look for patterns. They've used it to, in certain circumstances, to identify what potential drugs may, potentially be used to treat certain diseases. You could potentially look at using AI to evaluate which drugs to use for which people, in terms of what's going to cause what side effect and whatnot, what's going to be most effective versus someone's body chemistry. But even those they're very, very targeted. Now, does there need to be more research into AI in order to elevate the possibilities of what is possible and using it in healthcare? Sure. But you can't just say, well, we need to use more AI. This is the issue with politicians. They have no idea how the technology works. They don't seem to understand the risks of AI, and they don't seem to understand that over in China, they don't really care about the risks of AI. They're just developing it full steam ahead. And it's going to be essentially the next battleground across the world is going to be AI, and whose AI can cause more havoc with the other country. So it was interesting that Mark starts into this, and then Christia's like, well, you can't use AI for everything. That was actually one of the things that I agree with Christia Freeland on, is no, you cannot use AI for everything.
I think there's a limited range of things that we can use it for right now. I mean, you and I, when we use it, it's usually to correct grammar in our emails and ask for sources on the web. And half the time it even gets that wrong. If we're looking for a source, say, I don't know how much radiation can the average nuclear worker be exposed to safely every year? And we ask for a source, it gives us something completely different.
Yeah, sometimes. And sometimes it makes stuff up.
Right.
So
you have to be very careful with AI. Again, that's why I said we really only use it just for checking our email and correcting our grammar.
Right. So this is the issue. When using AI, it's not trust but verify. It's use and then verify. Because in many cases, it's not correct. So there needs to be a lot more development when it comes to AI. And honestly, they need people in that government that understands what AI actually is in order to actually make decisions on how to invest and when to invest.
Once again, the Liberal Party is the party that upholds the Charter of Rights and Freedom. So our work as a federal government and my work as a Prime Minister would be to defend the rights and freedoms of each Canadian. And Quebecers themselves have brought this to the Supreme Court, and they are fighting against this law. As a government, I will support them to make sure that each Canadian in this country will have access to their rights and freedoms.
I would like to add, very well said, Karina. I completely agree. Our party is the party of the Charter, and as Prime Minister, I will always, always uphold the Charter.
Always, eh?
Always.
Except for that one time.
Yeah, except for that one time where I voted to invoke the Emergencies Act, and I seized the bank accounts of a whole bunch of Canadians, stole millions of dollars from Canadians, and essentially laughed about it when I was questioned about it. Except for that time, right, Christia?
But we don't talk about that time, do we?
Well, we talk about it all the time.
Yeah, we do.
But this is the thing, folks. The Liberals would just have you forget all of the stuff that they've done over the last 10 years. They would have you forget all of the scandals. They would have you forget that time where they illegally invoked the Emergencies Act. And a liberal judge ended up saying, no, that was illegal and unconstitutional that you actually did that. It was an abuse of power because the criteria of invoking the Emergencies Act was not met in the slightest, because there's no such thing as an economic emergency. So, no, that doesn't fly. So, nice try, Christia. We're paying attention, just like every other Canadian is. Now, the last clip that we're going to show is about this high-speed rail project that has been talked about recently by Justin Trudeau. And the candidates were asked, do you support this? What do you think about it?
The government, Trudeau, announces that it'll go forward with a project of $10 billion for a high-speed train between Quebec and Toronto. These major investments might give positive both investment results and climate results. So what's your vision for this project? Is it to be financed essentially by the government? Is it a public project? Is it a private project? Is it a PPP? What should be done with this project that Mr. Trudeau is launching and Mr. Carney has the first word?
Mr. Trudeau announced the TGV this week. He didn't consult me. I don't have the figures. But it is an interesting project. It's very important for our economy in terms of how we fund this project. It's clear that there has to be public and private funding. It's clear that the federal government has committed to invest about $4 billion over the next decade to prepare for the project. Now, if the project is the right one, if it's viable, well, quite probably the government will support the project.
Now, that wasn't a mistranslation. What this project essentially says is they want to build a high-speed rail network between Toronto and Quebec, with stops in Ottawa, Montreal, I believe Laval, and Trois-Rivières. And the idea is that you could get from Toronto to Montreal within 3 hours. And this train would go around 300 kilometers an hour and all this stuff.
Now, these types of trains are common in Europe. I recall when I was a teenager and had visited France, we took one of these trains from Paris all the way to Provence. So they go very fast and they connect much of the country.
Now, the thing that kind of disturbs me, and it should disturb every Canadian, is when Mark said, and this is where I'm saying that there wasn't a mistranslation, is that they want to spend around $4 billion over the next 10 years to determine if this project should go ahead.
They want to spend $4 billion on a study.
Yeah.
Not on the train itself.
Yeah, $3.9 billion. And
oh my goodness, why does a study cost $4 billion?
Well, here's one reason, because one of the core companies that's involved in this is named Atkins Realis.
Ah, there you go.
AKA SNC Lavalin.
The company formerly known as SNC Lavalin.
So why are we like this? It's unreal.
This is a joke.
Unreal that on his way out, he is still throwing money at SNC Lavalin. Maybe that's the only company that is going to be willing to put Justin Trudeau on the board once he finally is out as prime minister. I don't know.
Could be.
But $4 billion just to study this thing, just to say, okay, well, where would we put the station?
And it's going to take 10 years to do it. Is that correct?
Who knows how long it's going to take?
How many governments can come and go in that span of time?
3.
Yeah.
Now, this is the issue. With any government project, you always expect that the budget's going to double. So are we really sitting here expecting that SNC Lavalin and these other companies, I think Air Canada was another one. Why do you need Air Canada involved in this? I don't know. I really don't know.
You'd think you would need somebody like CP Rail involved instead. Or like Metrolinx or something.
I don't know. It's possible they're going to be involved, but like, anyway, you have $4 billion, may end up being $8 billion by the time they're done, and then they'll say, yeah, we think this is a good idea. It's only going to cost another $10 billion to actually get it done. Like this is
that amount of money for a study is nuts.
Like that's a lot of zeros.
That is
folks.
a lot of zeros.
So, but this is what they're saying. This is what they're saying. Now, the idea of this train is a good idea.
I would argue, I don't know if it's good or bad at this point, but I would question how many Canadians would use it, because really in North America, we're a car culture. And if you get on a train in Toronto and you take it to Montreal, you're going to need a vehicle to get around once you get there. So are you going to rent a car? Are you going to take transit? How good is the transit system in Montreal? Personally, I don't know. But these are things I think that would deter people from taking a train like that. I mean, when you're in Europe, like for example, when I went to Europe as a teenager, we got on the train in Paris, we got off in Provence, we took a tour bus, and then we walked around the town that we were in. Can you do that here in Canada? I don't know. Well, I would argue that you probably can't.
Well, and this is the thing. Peterborough doesn't have a great mass transit system. They don't have rail. They don't have anything like that. They have buses. That's about it.
I've heard bad things about Ottawa's transit system. Right.
So sure, there needs to be a study to see if it even makes sense. But why are you making these announcements even before you've determined if this makes sense or not?
Because they're campaign promises to try to win Canadians' votes.
I forgot.
Because that's what this leadership race is to me, it's less of a internal leadership race, and it's more of like a pre-election campaign against the Conservatives.
Right. And you can see in almost every question, all these candidates are like agreeing with each other. They're just modifying their approaches slightly on what they're going to do. There was no attempt to one up anybody, which is what you're supposed to do in a debate. There was no attempt by anybody to essentially assert themselves and say, no, I want to win. All these other guys suck. You should vote for me. But this is not what we got. Well,
maybe the English debate tonight will be very different.
Well, we'll see. Carney does have a better command on the English language than he does on the French. So that's not to say that he's riveting and he's charismatic, because even in his French words, he sounds like he's giving a presentation to a bunch of shareholders. He's not charismatic. He's not a guy that sounds competent at all to be able to do the job. But it's going to be the guy that the Liberals probably are going to be anointing as the next leader of their party. So we will see what happens, folks. But those are the highlights from the 2-hour quote unquote debate. Let's just call it a discussion that happened last night. But one thing's for sure is Mark Carney must be relieved that he doesn't have to speak in French anymore today.